Hello, my name is Patricia Noel Drain, and my podcast is Women Entrepreneurs Over 50. They want to make a difference while they're making an income and making an impact, doing exactly what they love. Well, let me tell you, I don't know what I would have done without Kim helping me for the past 3 years. She helps me edit, she helps upload, and she even makes sure that the titles I use are SEO appropriate. Don't walk, run. Hire Kim for your podcast team today.
Hello there, beautiful women. It is Kim Parkinson with Podcasting for Your Spiritual Business. And last week, I talked with Valerie Dumont about using AI in your podcasting. She talked specifically about how it took her one day to edit a podcast episode and how she then moved over and started to use AI as a support tool to her workflow. And I know I have talked to a lot of different women out there, and I know that they are really worried about AI as a whole, not just using the energy from it, not just using the resources from it or for it, but also losing that authenticity of yourself, losing that little piece of yourself. She even talked about it in episode 52, where Valerie mentioned that she, felt like she had lost a little bit of herself because of the AI. And so it really took a little bit more of her thinking about the next steps. And I wanted to address that because I too use AI as a support tool. Now, I don't use it as a be all end all, but I think in this day and age, a lot of us use it. And there's lots of different pieces of AI, right? There is the logging into Netflix and saying, I want to watch something romance comedy, and then it pops up different options. That is using a form of AI. That's using an algorithm to kind of show you what shows you might be interested into watching. But then it's also things that I've talked about along the way here about organic discoverability, right? It's going to Apple Podcasts and typing in spiritual entrepreneurs and being one of those first ones that pop up in that field, in that space. And honestly, last month when I did this live for my 28-day podcast growth activation members, I was shocked myself. Honestly, I was pleasantly surprised, pleasantly shocked that my podcast was up there, was number 5, was one of the top 5 that was there and being searched for when people search for spiritual entrepreneurs. So these are just some of the ways that AI are already working behind the scenes for you, right? And we're not talking about making this inauthentic. We're not talking about creating these imageries of, what looks natural, what looks real, but then ends up being not. I don't know if you've seen those videos out there. They're quite disturbing in some cases. And while, yes, before we had CGI and people could make these things more realistic back then, and of course it's ever evolving, right? But how can we make AI part of our podcasting journey? How can we do this? And I'm going to kind of walk you through my workflow of how I do this. And then I'm going to just kind of give you a little bit more topics here about how to use it as a support tool. So when I come up with a conversation starter, when I come up with a topic idea, what I do is I actually open ChatGPT and then I voice text it into a very specific now I have projects on my side. I pay for ChatGPT. So on the left-hand side, I have these projects, and one of my projects is my podcast. And then I open a new one because then they all kind of stay together. And I say, this is my topic idea. And what I do is I just dump everything in there, all my thoughts. I just voice text it all because that's how I work best. I work best when I use my voice. And so I just spit out everything that I can. And then what I end up doing is I then say to it, can you please create me an outline that would flow from one thought to the other? Because sometimes I have a thought And then I think, oh, no, that needed to be back there with the first part that I talked about. And rather, years ago, maybe if somebody had done that, it would have meant cutting that piece of audio and then moving it over to the beginning piece of audio. And yes, I could still do that. I have the technology, I know how to do it. But isn't it so much easier to just like voice text it and then a program basically says to you, spits out an outline for you and says, these actually work really well together and you should go from this, this thought process to this thought process and then move on from there. And it's just really made me sound better in my own mind, and made it easier for you to follow along with me. Because sometimes I could go off on a tangent for sure. Right. So I could definitely move on and then be like, oh, and by the way, back there, when we were talking about, that's so confusing to you. That's so confusing to me. Never mind you. And so realistically, what I'm doing here is I'm basically taking everything in my brain, dumping it into a program, and then asking it to say, can you put all of that together in a little package? And then would you wrap a bow on it? and again, it's not spitting out my script. I don't use a script. I had tried to use a script. Does not work for me. I'm much more of a outline kind of gal. So I get to the structuring of my ideas, and then I get to outlining the episodes, and then I voice record it. As soon as I get the outline and I take a look at it, I read it through, make sure that it is something that would actually flow, something I would say. Sometimes AI puts in things and I'm like, I wouldn't say that. So I leave it out. Right. And then there's also times where you have to say to yourself, this is a perfect time to put in a story. This is a perfect time to talk about a client, or this is a perfect time to talk about a problem that I had, and put those stories in, because AI doesn't know your stories. It doesn't know your background. I mean, it knows what you've put in there, but it's not going to say, hey, I really think that chicken story you had from last week is going to fit perfectly into this episode right here. The odds of that happening right now aren't there. Maybe someday, but you know what? Let's keep a little bit of the humanity. Human wisdom first, technology second. That's what I'm saying here. So I think there's a lot of storytelling that you can put in there, emotional sharing, coaching insights, personal experiences, anything that is authentic, right? Those ones you're going to be putting in. And you can't put it in if you have a script, more often than not, because then you might lose your place in the script. That's how I feel. And again, this isn't always for everyone. This is what I believe, right? This is how it works for me. Yours could be different. You might need a script. You might need the teleprompter to kind of walk you through everything. And maybe you've already done the hard work ahead of time and already put in a story, or put in a little bit about the story to kind of prompt yourself to remember what you were going to talk about in that area. If that is what works for you, that's great, because that's what is going to move the needle for your podcasting journey. Now, everybody is different. Every piece of this is different. Using AI does not mean that you're being inauthentic, does not mean that you're not being, true to yourself, true to your business, true to your listeners even. It is meaning to be a support system for you, right? It's a way to say, I have this thought, I have these thoughts, I want to put them all together, and can you create a script based on this? And that's possible, that you could do that. Scripting is not for me, but doesn't mean it can't be for you. Okay. So a couple of other ways that podcasters are using AI right now, other than like myself making an outline or writing scripts for us, is I use Descript. I know. I say a lot of scripting, apparently. I use Descript. That's Descript. And I use it for editing. I don't just use that for editing. I also use Audacity for editing. And I also use another company called Auphonic not for editing, but for fixing of the audio. Now, Descript is great because you load in your files and then it will automatically transcribe it. And if you wanted it to, it could automatically remove filler words. It could add in your intro and your outro. It could, add in right now, will even add in B-roll and all these other pieces and things. I don't use any of that. I will be honest, I don't use any of it. I am going to be doing a episode very soon on how I do my podcast production because I think people are fascinated by that, but this isn't that one. But I don't use Descript for removing filler words or for adding in B-roll or any of that. I do all of that manually, I guess. Why? More so because I think that it's still inadequate. I still think AI is inadequate in some of those pieces. I think it can teach you a lot, but I also think that there are some pieces that you just need to keep that humanity. You need to keep that. And not all filler words need to be removed. Just because you say and doesn't always mean that it needs to be taken out. Sometimes it's the way you talk. And if I took it out, there would be maybe a blip or whatever. Anyway, that's more into podcast production. So let's go back into this. What other ways are people using AI? Now, you might have heard Valerie talk about she uses Opus Clips. So she takes her videos and her podcast episodes and she puts it into a company called Opus Clips. Now, that's a very popular company. There's other ones out there that do something similar. And then what it does, and even Descript will do this to some degree, and it will take your podcast and it will then cut it up into reels that you can use or audiograms, whatever you want to use. You can use something like that. She uses another company called Vid.io. I have used them before. They are specific to YouTube. So that will help you with the YouTube, finding the right thumbnail and all of that, finding the right names and description and all of that. Again, all of these are kind of AI. Now, there's no right or wrong here. I do use chat because I have a framework that I can add to my folder that then basically tells ChatGPT how to do it Kim's way, how to pull a podcast title Kim's way, how to pull podcast show notes Kim's way. And, it's always a tweak because I'm either changing it or I'm tweaking it or I'm changing the words, the verbiage, whatever. So I'm doing that. I use chat, but you can certainly use any of the others, Perplexity and Gemini and Claude, any of those others that are out there. You can do that. You can turn your transcripts into blog posts or into newsletters or into social media posts. You can do all of that by grabbing that transcript that you have and then uploading it and saying, can you pull out the best quote from this episode? I've done that before. It doesn't always work. It does sometimes, and sometimes it's amazing. But sometimes I'm like, nope, that is not a good quote because that had nothing to do with the episode. So, you do have to use some discretion in that cases. Now, again, we talked a little bit about episode planning and brainstorming episode topics. So, for instance, I knew because when I do a interview, I like to follow it up with something that has like an integration type episode of what it was that we talked about last week and kind of pull it back so that there's a little bit more of that. So she gave us her knowledge on AI and then here's my knowledge on AI, that type thing. So I do this quite often with each of my interviews. And by putting the transcript in, I can ask Chat or Gemini or whoever I'm using to pull out some, episode topics that maybe I can expand on. That's really cool, right? That's a really cool way to do that. And sometimes you can get more than one idea out of it. So why not? Go for it. In, again, the structuring of the outlines, you can even create some interview questions. Although I will say, I have done this to the point where it has worked well. And I have done this to the point where I sound stuffy and like I have a good interview question. So in Valerie's, there's actually one entire question that I asked her right away. And I removed the entire bit. It was probably a 6-minute segment. And it just did not fit with the rest of the episode. And the question that I asked was so very AI driven that I did not feel like it was authentic. So I removed it. And that is my discretion here, but also me telling you that sometimes it comes up with interview questions that are just stuffy. That's the word for it, stuffy. They're very, this is what AI would ask. And I've actually used AI also for sending out some emails. But again, I always voice text it in and then say, can you organize my thoughts? And then I go from there. I have actually received emails back from people where you can tell that it was written completely by ChatGPT and they made no edits, no changes whatsoever. And so then you have to wonder, I wonder if they actually understand what chat was talking about. But that's probably not the best way a podcaster can use their AI. So, but creating those interview questions is important. And sometimes you don't have all the ideas, and putting in who that person is, maybe put in their website, put in, their topics of conversation, and then knowing what your podcast is about, and then say, hey, is there anything I should ask this person? You never know. They may come up with something that sparks some interest, and then you move in that direction completely. And again, that's what it is. It's the sparking of interest. That's where you want to go with that. Now, I have used chat to pull keyword ideas and keyword phrases and keywords out of my transcripts, and also to help me with titles. Now, I don't always stick with the titles that they gave me because sometimes, well, first of all, I hate the colon. So I always remove that. But then sometimes I don't like that it doesn't sound right. It doesn't flow. And while, yes, it has a lot of keywords in it, it just doesn't flow. So sometimes I'll say, can we also use this word? Can we use how to? Can we use the top 5? Can we, and so I ask it questions until we come up with something that is usable, something that isn't, again, stuffy and very AI driven. We want it to be something that sounds like us, not something that sounds like a machine. So I don't always just go with whatever chat tells me the first time. I utilize it and I ask it questions and I go from there. So I really hone it in and figure out where it is, where it's going, and then making it my own. So again, I record my own thoughts first, and then I upload any kind of transcripts to AI. I ask AI to organize my structure, and then I go from there with it. So I use it as a tool, not as a be all end all. And I think that's really super important there. Now, let's see, some other tools, I think. We talked about Descript. There's also Riverside, if you're interested. Riverside also helps you with AI editing. AI editing, as a matter of fact, I think Adobe does this now too, where what I consider AI editing is that you put the audio in and then you can see the words, and then you can actually edit the words rather than the WAV files. I learned how to edit via WAV files, so I know what an looks like, and I know what some words look like. And so it makes it easier for me to seamlessly kind of grab those and cut them so that they sound like it flows. Whereas if you just edit the words, sometimes it might sound choppy. So be aware of that. Now, content repurposing. I talked specifically about Cast Magic. I love Cast Magic. I don't know the price point of Cast Magic. I purchased it on AppSumo years ago, have loved it ever since, and I use it quite frequently. I love it because it keeps the container of that episode. And if I tell it that I want it to take, 2 episodes and make me a workbook out of it or something, it will do that. So it's kind of a really cool tool. It is different than Opus Clips, which is what I suggested earlier. Opus Clips pulls things for reels and whatnot, whereas Cast Magic, I think they're moving in that direction. Maybe they already have, but I just haven't explored that. I use it for other pieces, so that's something that you might want to look at. But and then of course, we've got the big ones here for any kind of like writing help. Or I love chat because I can voice text right into it. I don't know as much about Claude Gemini. I do use Perplexity occasionally, more for research, but I know that there's a lot of different ones out there. So whatever one you're comfortable using, that's the one that you want to kind of stick with. Because here's the thing, you really want this to be something that you want to use that's supportive to you. You don't really want it to be something that you use that you rely on. That's the important difference. You want it to be supportive, but you don't want to rely on it. You want it to be something where it's taking a load off of your plate. I mean, like it would take me maybe a good hour to 2 hours to kind of write down all my ideas of the topics that I want to talk about, then sort them to what makes more sense, and then actually record. That would take, maybe a couple of hours to do. Whereas again, if I voice text it into chat, it does it for me in a fraction of the time. And that could save me hours a day, could realistically save me at least an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes of the day, however long it takes me to do all of the voice texting. And again, like I would normally have to write it all down. So AI does not have to be something that you use if you feel like I'm absolutely not using it. And I know people that are like that. I'm not using it. I'm not going to touch it. I don't have any desire to touch it. They're very proud that they don't touch it. That is fine. There's no right or wrong way here. But if you are, I need to save myself, an hour. This podcasting, I love it. I really want to use it. But, between like writing down my ideas and then sorting and then recording and then editing and then all of the other pieces to go with it, it's just taking me, more time than I wanted to. Then maybe using AI is actually a good idea for you, because not everybody can sort all of the different topics that they want to talk about in their head naturally. Sometimes you need some help, or you need that research time. And by having AI kind of help you with that research time, I don't think it's a cheat. I think it's a hack. I think it's a win. I think this is how you can use it and still maintain your authority, still maintain your piece of this. So let me tell you today, full disclosure here. I typed into AI this morning. I edited the video or the audio with Valerie Dumont. And I said, I'd like to talk to my audience a little bit more about AI. And this is exactly what I said to it. I said, I want to talk about using AI in your podcast for the next episode. What are some topics I should pay attention to? That's it. That's all I wrote. And then I made this entire episode based on some of the things that it wrote in there. Not everything. I mean, it went through and it gave me 10 different segments I could go with. I did not go with 10 segments here. I did what I wanted to do. I told you some of the bits that I wanted to tell you, and I kept it true to me, true to how I work, and I explained how I use it. I'm not going to be putting this into Descript in a few minutes and then having Descript pull out all the ums and ahs. I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to leave them in, or I'm going to remove them myself. And again, we want to make sure that our authentic voices are more valuable, not less valuable. So making that switch from using AI to not, it can make your life easier if it works with you, your voice, and your authenticity. If you are a purist and feel like AI is not the way you want to go, then don't go that way. There is nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with using AI, and there's nothing wrong with not using AI. It's just how you work. I will tell you one thing I do not agree with AI. Using AI to do the entire recording of your podcast. I really feel like you need to use your voice here. And I know I could say an entire speech into Descript, and Descript would then take my voice and it would put my voice to the words that I pop up, and then it would just create this entire thing for me. I'm not interested in that. I want to talk to you one-on-one, or one-to-many, or however you want to call this. I want it to be me that tells you what I want to tell you. I don't want a machine telling you that. And those companies that are out there that are creating hundreds of podcast episodes based on, somebody's voice or AI voice. They're so inauthentic. And I really truly believe that there needs to be a little bit of humanity left in that. And if I can implore you to do anything, please continue to use your voice to bring your wisdom, your knowledge, and everything you have that you want to share out there to the world. Don't let AI steal your voice, because without that, then, as we mentioned last week in episode 52 with Valerie, if you get to a point where the client reaches out and they talk to you and you do not sound the same, the cadence of your voice isn't the same, the way you talk isn't the same, maybe you say too many ums or uhs or swear words or whatever it might be. If you are not sounding like you sound on your podcast, that could be a real turnoff to them. So maintain that authority, maintain that voice, and just use AI in other forms, and run with that, because I think it's a fun tool to use, and we have to remember that's what it is. It's a tool. So use the tool and use it smarter, and help you get discovered, and help you stay on track, and help you maybe take a couple of hours out of your day and make it easier for yourself. So that is my thoughts on AI. I would love to know what your thoughts are on AI. So if you are using AI in your podcast and you feel like, hey, I'd love to have a conversation about that, please reach out, Kim@kpcreativemedia.com, and let me know what you thought about using AI in podcasting, and how you use it with your podcast, how you use it with your podcast workflow. And I can't wait to have a discussion with you about it, maybe like a little email discussion, and find out how you are using AI with your podcast. All right. Until next time, where your voice flows, your business grows. See you then. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Podcasting for Spiritual Women. If you would like more strategy and tips and some tricks on how to make your podcast better, I recommend that you join my newsletter list. You can find that at kpcreativemedia.com/newsletter. Until next time.